Hello everyone, welcome back. Whoa, hello. Forgot to change my audio. One moment. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Welcome back. We'll try this again. So today I figured I would dive into the tab control. One of my prior videos was going back and forth with some questions on it, and I realized after trying to answer a couple of them that this control is a little more complicated than normally I would have thought. I've often told people that the data grid is the most complicated control in the WPF arsenal, but the tab control is actually slightly more complex. The closer I looked at it, the more I realized that there's a lot of nuances. So figured we would dive in, take a look at a question, some answers, how it works. A lot of this is going to bleed into other controls as well, specifically other items controls, list views, list boxes, a little bit of data grid stuff, and kind of how templating styles and virtualization and all of that jazz works. But first, Hacktoberfest. Basically one of my favorite times every year. So for those people who may not have heard of it, this is a time for people to get involved in open source. So you can see their values here. Everyone is welcome. Quantity is fun. Quality is key. So the idea is trying to get people to contribute to open source, but trying to make meaningful contributions. Now, meaningful doesn't necessarily mean big. There's oftentimes open source projects have lots of tasks that may not be big, complicated things that just may not have gotten done. Because quite frankly, a lot of maintainers, there's a finite number of hours in the day, stuff just doesn't happen. You just run out of hours. So finding those types of items to help out with is awesome. So if you want to contribute, the registration is now open. Drop a link for anybody interested. So hacktoberfest.com. Once you go through the registration, which you can tie it to either a GitLab or a GitHub account, you end up seeing something like this. As you can see, I am signed up. My progress, 0 of 4 pull requests because it's not October yet, so it doesn't count. Your pull requests have to open between October 1st and October 31st. Yeah, you can register anytime between now and the end of October. So if you're watching the recording of this on YouTube and it's not before October 31st, 2022, get on it. You still have time. There is rewards. There are, for the first 40,000 people who complete those 4 pull requests, you can either elect to have a tree planted in your name or a Hacktoberfest t-shirt. So they are fairly decent t-shirts. I've gotten one most years. And yeah, there are several things too that I want to call out. So if you are looking for things that might be useful, there are some great websites like Up for Grabs where you can come in here and filter based upon language, framework. So if you're looking for something, this website here kind of curates a bunch of repositories that have opted in to be included, and they also come with nice links for I think we could probably find, if we go WPF in here, there's probably only a handful of these in here. Look at that, material design and XAML. So you can see here it actually links out and it shows you which labels are likely to be good ones. So in this case, things that are up for grabs, or even if people are seeing this, you can also jump on the Hacktoberfest label. This one has kind of fallen out. Early years, they used to use this to indicate what was an acceptable contribution. Now it's all about just finding repositories that have the Hacktoberfest topic added on them. So as long as you see the Hacktoberfest topic and your pull request doesn't get flagged as, I'm trying to remember, spam, invalid, there's a handful of tags that maintainers can use to mark stuff. So please don't spam maintainers because it takes their time to look at pull requests and it's not nice. But for people who are interested, there are lots of things out there. You'll also note that there's some decent Microsoft ones out there, including there's documentation repositories for the WPF docs. There's actually quite a few in the .NET space. I was going to point out a couple Microsoft ones, but I'm struggling to find them at the moment. Where are they? The .NET SDK. Really wish these were alphabetized, but they seem to be moving around. MS Build is obviously another fun one to dive into. There's the docs, WinForms. I believe WPF directly is on there as well. Yeah. So .NET WPF, there are some help wanted issues open. So if you are interested in contributing to WPF directly and you haven't worked on stuff before, this is an awesome opportunity. This upforgrabs.net is a great way of finding those repositories that might overlap with either skills that you have or wish you had. Either one. Sometimes this is a good opportunity to say, hey, you know, I was really hoping to learn insert language or framework here. Let's dive in and take a look. So, yeah, and they've got some nice resources here. I typically do at least one stream on doing pull requests, forking repositories, understanding Git, all the Git crackety happy stuff. So if people are interested, they obviously plug GitHub Desktop. Link below, Git Kraken. Definitely my preference of choice. Okay, so there's that. There's this. There's that. Okay, so what are we doing today? Whoop. Close. And I need to find... Yeah, so there was a YouTube video I did a while back. And by a while back, I mean like a couple weeks ago. And let's see, I'll just drag it over. It's very much zoomed in, but it was the one on Material Design XAML Custom Control Visual State Manager. So the first part of this stream was all focused on the Material Design library, and then a question came up around some custom controls of visual states. And as is my custom, I got mildly distracted and ran down a rabbit hole. So there's the video if anyone's interested. But Ray Carrot here had a bunch of really good questions, specifically around the tab control. And I'm not going to address the questions right away. I kind of want to dive into the tab control itself, and then we'll circle back to the questions, just so that we have some good context in how things are working. Okay, so I have a, and I guess I should probably link to it as well. Let's do that real quick. So I have an examples repository. Examples. So this is where we're gonna play. So I started an empty project down underneath tab control MVVM. It's more or less a blank project for the moment, but we'll dive in and take a closer look. So I've done a handful of things kind of preemptively because I was playing around with this myself. So I pulled in the community toolkit, MVVM NuGet package. If you haven't seen my prior video on how awesome it is, you're going to get a crash course in it really quick tonight. We've got a main window, view model, data context gets set, and then we've got a tab view model, which is all empty. Main window view model is all empty. XAML's all empty. So not a whole lot. So let's start with looking at kind of a tab structure. So oftentimes when people think of a tab control, the first things that come to mind are like web browsers. You got your tabs along the top. You got a little close in the corner. You got something like Visual Studio, something about like this, right? So let's look at building something like that out. We're going to start with this. Let's go with, actually, before we get too carried away with the grid, let's just start with the straight up tab, right? And so a tab control derives from items control. So the same way that you might interact with, say, a list box, you can interact with a tab control in the same way. So we're going to take its item source, we're going to bind, call a property called tabs, and yeah, we're going to start like that. Start there for now. Stop writing the code for me, Copilot. You're taking all the fun out of it. That's not what we're going to write, but props, Copilot, for being cool and awesome. Yeah, no. Okay, so let's come in here. Let's make this guy an observable object. Boom. And then we need a property. Boom. How about a private nullable string of title, something like that. Poof, done. Again, if anybody hasn't taken a look at my video on the Community Toolkit MVVM, there is some absolutely awesome stuff here. Boom. Just move this real quick. I don't know what it's gonna pop immediately. I will find the link. Where is my video? Oh, I just saw it and I clicked. There, found it. Open. This one here. So, again, if you haven't seen it, highly recommended. It's quickly become one of my more popular videos. Mostly because it shows this kind of stuff. Okay, so we got a view model. We're going to do that. Our main window view model now needs something like an observable collection of tab view models. We're just going to call it no tabs. Can't type. That's okay. Let's do. Okay, Copilot, you're being very helpful. Now get out of the way. Okay, so we'll do something like that. And we're just going to populate this with a couple things. Sure, that will work. Thank you, Copilot. You are awesome. Sometimes its ability to figure out exactly what I want is creepy. Okay, so that'll get us a view model, some tabs. Now let's use them. Okay, so I'm going to cheat and grab my sorry, I'm checking to see because I had a little bit of a sample that I was going to work from. See, I did prep a little bit. It's great. Sure. Okay, so we're gonna go here. So tab control. Now, the first thing to know about tab control is there's both an item template, and then there's also a content template. These are subtly different. So item template is going to be your tab header, and your content template is going to be the content of your individual tab items. That's going to be really important here in a little bit. So item template, you are just really wanting to help me. So I mean, we're going to start here, but we're going to throw this away. So let's do something a little different. Something like a grid, because I'm thinking I want to just quickly throw together effectively that kind of browsery type experience, right? So we will do this. We will do, actually, you know what? This is one of the few cases where I'm going to go doc. We'll go doc, yeah. Okay. So we're going to do button content. I'm too lazy to pull in an icon library like material design, so I'm just going to do that. We'll put a little thing, doc panel, doc right, and then we are going to text block, text, let's see, binding. Oh, you don't know your data type. Data template, data type. Let's see. Type local tab item view model, figure it out, and then you should have a title property. Boom. Okay. And then let's just go down here. We're gonna do this. So this is gonna be the same data type. So our main window view model has a collection. I realized I did that kind of quickly. Has an observable collection of tab view models. The tab view models have a single property of title. Now I'm using a bunch of source generator magic, so trust me, this looks like a field. There's a property there. You can see there's a property there because we assign it right there. Yay. So we will set this thing up. It's going to have 3 tabs. On our tab item itself, the little tab headers at the top, we'll just put the title and then a little close button. Let's just do something like a min width of 100. Just something fun. Just something a little bit. A little something fun. Just for anybody paying attention, for a dock panel, the default behavior is last child fill. So last child fill true. So that's the default. So what will end up happening is this button will get docked to the right hand side. Sorry, the horizontal on my camera is messed up. Right hand side, and the text block will end up filling the remaining space. That'll work there. Down here, we're just going to do title. So the content of our tab is just going to be the individual tab itself. Let's just fire it up and make sure it works. Okay, so roughly as expected, we can click through. We can see all these things here. It'd be nice if we got this working. Let's get this working real quick, and then we'll circle back. So we need a button here, and then we probably need a way to add new items. So we're gonna go grid row definitions. So I think I'm just gonna put a menu at the top to give me a place to add new tabs. And then we'll just implement the close button on this guy. Row 1. Okay, so we need a menu. Menu. Then we'll just do menu item, header, new tab. For anybody curious about the underscore here, content controls in WPF have accessor keys, meaning so when you hold down Alt, they light up. So you'll see this in Visual Studio as well. If you hold down Alt, you can see that the F, E, V, G, I project, all these things along the top line up. And if I end up pressing something like Alt D, it ends up selecting the debug menu and then rinse repeat all the way down. So I generally like to put those in just because I like my keyboard. It's nice not having to take my things on my hands off the keys. So let's see, we've got the data context already assigned, but we need a command. So let's go in here and do let's see, private void new tab, maybe seems reasonable. And then how about a private void close tab, tab item view model tab. Except for we're going to spell tab correctly rather than T-E-B. Tab. So tabs, remove tab, like that. Tabs dot add. And let's do this. Private int counter. I think what I'm going to just do is I'm going to do something like this where it's just going to repeatedly count up. So we'll do interpolated string counter plus plus. Here we go. And then down here we can actually just make, rather than having this thing here, we're just going to go whoop, whoop, whoop. You have to make the noise when you paste. It's important. Or at least it's important to me. Okay, now we just need to make these commands. So relay command and relay command. So again, if you haven't taken a look at this, I don't think I really need this thing to be an observable object, but we're going to do it anyway. Because we'll probably want it at some point. You'll note I did intentionally declare all of my classes as partial. That's intentional with in order to be able to leverage the source generators. The way they end up working is they generate additional partial classes. Again, more details in those videos. Okay, so now we can come in here. Oh, stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it. Where did that window go? Don't pull up. There. Stay there. Stop it. Okay. So we're going to do new tab command. So the new one doesn't require anything, but the close does. So we're going to go with, let's see, command binding. Now in this case, this command is already inside of a tab view model. So for people familiar with MVVM, whenever you see a binding, the most important question to ask is, what is the context of the binding? Or to put it another way, what is the source object that contains the property that I'm going to get this data from? So in this case, because we've done nothing to change it, the source is going to be tab item view model, but the command that we want is actually up on main window view model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump up to the to higher up in the view hierarchy. So we're going to go relative source. Let's see, find ancestor. Ancestor type is going to be tab control, and we're just going to bounce up to the tab control, and then that means the path for this binding is going to be data context dot what was it, close tab command or thereabouts. I think. Okay. And then this thing will have trouble giving you IntelliSense because, pretty impressive you have that memorized. It comes from typing it about 80,000 times. I've done it a couple times. But you'll know, normally I was getting reasonable IntelliSense. As soon as you go data context dot, you lose IntelliSense because data context, this property is just of type object. And so it goes, I don't know. Okay. So we'll go there, and then the last thing is this command actually took a parameter, so we need to give it the parameter, though typing is important. Command parameter, and then binding. So binding by itself is the equivalent of just doing path equals dot, and path equals dot just says bind to myself, my current data context. So in this case, it's literally just going to take in the tab item view model and set that as the command parameter, which is perfect because that's what our close tab wants. Okay, let's see if it works. Okay, so I've got that. I can go new tab, bing, 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 make lots of tabs, great, close, 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 close. So yeah, works. Huzzah. If you are on the material design library, you'll note that rather than this behavior for the tab headers, it actually has a nice horizontal scroll like what you would expect. But this is just, we've done no styling here. This is just straight default WPF. Nothing fancy. You collapse. You're in the way. So there we have at least a basic implementation of a tab control. And obviously we could put more content into our tab view models. We could do a lot more inside of, oh, dear heavens, okay, Visual Studio, the next feature I want a little bit longer delay when I click and drag so it doesn't accidentally just fling my tabs everywhere. Going back, we could go through and change up this content template to be a little more advanced, build out our view model, add more stuff, whatever. But there's a couple key things that are important to note here. So one, all of these items are getting the exact same data template. Okay, so every time we go through and switch tabs, we don't have a disparate set. Because you could bind yourself to a collection that contains objects of arbitrary types. Like maybe rather than having some sort of data-driven tab view, you have a lot of maybe more specific things, right? Maybe I've got a user profile tab, an address tab, a phone numbers tab, right? It's not that I've got this data-driven set. Maybe part of it's data-driven, but I only have like some well-known constrained limit, depending on what you're building, right? And in those cases, you probably have different templates that come through. If we take a look at this guy, let's start breaking this guy apart. So step one, for anybody who doesn't have it, Snoop is your best friend. Absolutely, cannot recommend this tool enough. GitHub, Snoop. This tool here, Snoop Wpf. You can download the latest from the releases here. Absolutely wonderful tool. Bastian Schmidt is awesome. Absolutely beautiful work. Best WPF debugging tool out there, in my humble opinion. Anyway, okay, so we take the crosshairs next to the binoculars, drag over our window, poof. It's worth noting when you drag the crosshairs over, it doesn't matter what element you drop it on. All it's using those crosshairs for is identifying the window and ultimately the process. So that is all it is doing. So if it looks like I go quick, it's because I was aiming at a really big target. Okay, so if we take a look here, so next pro tip for Snoop is once you get it attached, what you can do is move your cursor over the element you want to inspect and hold down the keys Control and Shift. And then you can see it jumped over to here. We get this nice little red outline showing us what we selected. And we can see that we are on a text block. Great. Not really shocking because our content template only contained a text block. So not surprising. We can see that inside of this guy, we are inside of a content presenter. And that content presenter has a text block. And we can see here's our tab control. And if we look at our header panel, you'll note these things contain the tab items. What you'll notice, I click through each of these tab items are really only this little part along the top. They only really reflect the portion of the tab that is the header. They don't actually represent the content. And this actually ends up being really, really important here in just a little bit when we start taking a look at this. So one of the questions that came up was around caching of this, because the idea was, well, I don't want to necessarily have to recreate these views every single time I click through this. When I come onto here, I would like to just have this content stay as it was. That's probably really poor phrasing. Probably poor phrasing. Let me put it another way. The content template, or I should say the tab control, makes the assumption that the content is all mutually exclusive, meaning I cannot be looking at two tabs at the same time. So when dealing with a tab control, the content of the tabs are all expected to be mutually exclusive, so that when I'm on tab 2, tab 1's content is not visible, right? And back on the prior video that I linked at the beginning, what actually brought this up was the discussion on visual states and kind of controlling how the control behaves and how that gets rendered. So in this case, the important thing to point out is that inside of the tab control, it just contains this selected content presenter and a header panel. This guy here isn't changing. You'll note there's no swapping of stuff happening in here. There's just this one text block. The beautiful thing about WPF, let's see if I can find it, boom, is WPF is open source. So for people who may not be aware of that, link to the repo. So the nice thing about this is if we're ever confused about what WPF is doing, or if you're looking for Hacktoberfest contributions, we can just go and open up the source code and take a look. Obviously, things like source.net have always been an option if you want to go and peruse the source code that way. But people who maybe want to just dive straight on in to the GitHub repo, here we are. So you'll note I'm currently sitting on a particular commit. This was just latest commit for this file when I was in here before. This wasn't necessarily anything special. But what I want to point out here is here's the style for the tab control. You'll note that it is targeting the tab control type. So this is effectively an implicit style. Down here, you'll note there's the tab panel. This is that header panel that we saw that contains the tab items. So if we look here, we can see header panel. Inside of Snoop, if there is a name on an element, an X name, it'll show up before the parens, and then everything in the parens is the type name. So we expect an element named header panel of type tab panel. So of type tab panel, let's go a little bigger. Of type tab panel, name header panel, great, lines up with what we saw. And then we can see this border and this content presenter down here. Now, the important thing to note with this content presenter, typically if you do nothing inside of a control template, if you just slap on a content presenter, it will magically get content as long as your custom control derives from content control. And the reason is because of this content source property. This content source property declares what property on my control do I get my content from. So in this case, tab control has a selected content property. So we can bounce over here. Here's the C# of the tab control. And there is our selected content property. Huzzah! Shows up. You'll note it is hidden from the designer, but if you just do tab control dot, you will find it. It just won't appear to you inside of the designer, for what it's worth. But the key thing here is you'll note this property is updated whenever the selection is changed. It always keeps a reference to the active tab item dot content. So if we recall what we had set up before, we have 3 tab items. The tab items themselves have content. So if we look at our tab items and dive into their content property, we can see here that the content property of each of our tab items is a tab item view model. Now note, they're the tab item view model. They're a view model, not a UI object. Okay? And what ends up actually making this work, because you'll note, these things here, if we look at template, what ends up making these things work is actually all the way up on this tab control. If we look at templates, we set up our content template and our item template on this guy. So as the tab is being selected, what's happening is the content property of the tab item is being set into the content presenter, and that content presenter is getting a content template. This template here is the same one that's coming off of this tab control. How do we know that? Well, we can let me close that window. Too many windows, too many windows. Okay, so if we look at selected content and I do something like selected content equals. So inside of tab control, there is this method called update selected content. And we can come in here and we can see, okay, when this method gets invoked, it retrieves the currently selected tab. Okay, nothing overly shocking there. It comes in here, and then you'll note the selected content property gets copied from the tab content. And then it's got some alignment stuff and whatnot. And then it does something a little bit fun. Is it checks the individual tab item and says, okay, if the individual tab item has anything set on it, and by anything, I'm referring to any of the content related properties. So a template selector, or a string format, go ahead and copy those in. But if none of those are set, go ahead and copy in the ones from the tab control itself. So what's ultimately happening is because we are setting this content template here, every time it calls update, the selected content template of the tab control is getting the value from the tab control's own content template. Now, this could be overridden if an individual tab item had something specific set on it, but in our case, we're only setting it at the very top. Okay, why is this important? Let's go back and take a look at question. Did I close it? I did. It was done with me. That one? Yes. Boom. Pause. Pause. Thank you. Okay, so if we come down here, the key part of the question is wanting to understand how we can possibly cache that rendered UI. So caching when using data template. And so the first thing I'm going to say is, one, you should first ask, do you really want to? Okay. Do you really want to cache the data template? Because by doing that, you are caching some UI objects. Because effectively you're looking for caching the rendered UI. And if you're caching the rendered UI objects, those things can get big fast. Like even if you only have a few things in your data template, the actual visual tree, the rendered bit of that, could have quite a few elements. Like for example, you may write just one tab control, but inside of that tab control, you've now gained a grid, a tab panel, a border, a content presenter, and that can spiral into more things as well. So first question is, do you really want to cache the UI? Now, there are some cases that I am aware of where it does actually make some sense to cache the UI. Typically, those cases are things where you've got UI elements that aren't data bound, and you want to make sure that those things effectively retain their position. Oftentimes, those are things like scroll viewers or maybe sliders or things like that, where maybe you've got a scroll viewer and the users, scroll down to some position, they toggle a tab and they come back and they want to be right where they left off, right? You don't want them to effectively have switched and come back. So let's take a look at how that ends up working. So what we're going to do is we're going to spin a new user control. Let's call it ref counting control, just for fun. Okay, so it's going to be a very simple user control. Let's give it a stack panel, text block, so xname, ref count, sure. And then text block, text, binding, title. So we're gonna just pretend like this thing's gonna work. We can cheat a little bit. The data context. Let's see. The design instance type local tab item view model. Poof. All that just so the little dots go away. So all this, and this is worth calling out as well. So the d: data context, and actually all of the properties that are d:, these are design time only properties. These are there entirely for the designer. They serve no purpose compile time. Yeah. I can't think of an exception to that rule. So, for example, let's just stop debugging for the moment. So, hypothetically, you can see that we've got this thing here. I could do something like d: background and make it red. And all I've done now is make the background of my window red, but only for the designer. All right, so I can, and I don't even have to do it here. So this is actually potentially interesting. We'll do this real quick. All right, so I can do the d background red. Boom. But you will note at runtime, there's nothing there. So worth keeping in your back pocket for people who do a lot of work in the designer, especially with like text wrapping. I'll oftentimes use this to like just slap some text in so that I can visually see like how the wrapping's probably going to look. Gives you a nice way of customizing the way this looks so that you can play with it and set stuff up without actually affecting your real running application. Okay. Ref count, and then we're just going to lie to this guy and tell him that his data context is going to be a tab item view model. It will be. He's just going to trust us. Oh, If anyone cares, yes, I am wearing a shirt with my logo on it. And yes, the green Mountain Dew can is being green screened away. Okay, so we're gonna go in here and we're gonna just clean this up because this is you ugly mess. There, boom, clean. Muchas better. Okay, so private static int, I don't know, ref count. Okay, so the key thing here is I want to do ref count plus plus. So every time this constructor is called, we are going to instantiate or we are going to increment this int. Worth noting, in multi-threaded environments, this is not a good way of doing counting because you've got threading problems. Because this is a UI object, and I'm not going to do anything crazy with multiple UI threads, this is good enough. There's only one thread where this possibly can be invoked. Okay, so we want to do ref count dot text instance count. Do something like this, maybe. I mean, just something like it. Just something like this. Right? So boom. We're just going to set that up so that his text is just going to show us how many are there. And then if we go back here, if we change out this data template to a local colon ref counting control, and then I don't even need to do anything else. So the key thing of what's going to happen here is because the data context for the data template has been defined up here, that's just going to propagate down. So the data context on this ref counting control will be a tab item view model, which means this binding will end up working. So let's fire this up and take a look. Oh, right. So pro tip, you can assign to the text box that's instantiated inside of initialized component. You have to assign to it after it's been created. Okay, so tab one, instance count 1, nothing fancy. Click, click. Only a single instance of our user control has been created. Now you recall earlier, I specifically called out that one of the things that makes this work so well is we have a nice homogeneous collection, right? All of our items in our tabs list are of the same type. They're going to get the same data template. Well, it turns out the tab control is nicely optimized for this case because having a UI with something like this, right, where you could imagine the data behind the tab is changing. But because we only are displaying one of these things at a time and our control template just has a content presenter for that one thing, it means that once it has gone through and rendered it, when we toggle back, there's no longer a problem. It realizes, hang on, I've already created these UI objects, and UI objects are kind of a pain, right? Like you have to create them on the UI thread. You can only touch them on the UI thread. And because we are able to do some optimizations for virtualization, if tabs are all going to be mutually exclusive, why should I instantiate more than one instance of this ref counting control? Right? If I only need one, why would I bother to create any more? Let's just swap that data context out behind the scenes and see it work. So let's just investigate this in Stoop to confirm that that's exactly what's happening. Right? So if we come in here and we look at our content presenter, or actually we're going to go up a little higher because this content presenter is down inside. So there's our user control. And this guy here is our content presenter that actually hosts our user control. You go away. So if I look at the data context, I can see that my content presenter isn't going to change. Oh, I should come down here. Oh, are you not going to auto refresh? That's disappointing. I was really thinking this thing was going to auto refresh for me. Okay, so apparently in Snoop, I have to auto refresh to see the data context change. It doesn't auto update for me. Disappointing. Disappointing. But refreshing, we can see that the underlying data context in our user control is in fact changing. And even up at this content host, if we click here, refresh, we can see that the data context is changing. If we come over here, we know that from when we looked at the code for the tab control, that what was happening at the tab control level is it was explicitly copying in the tab item content into the selected content property. So if we go all the way up to our tab control and look at our selected content, right, we can see this view model here. And if I double click, I can dive in. I can see, yes, that is tab 3. Great. Back up. If I go here, the yellow in Snoop is just a visual indicator when things are changing, which can often be really helpful to track down stuff. I can double click in here. I can see, okay, yes, it is now tab 1. So the content itself is swapping out, and because it is already optimized, knowing that it has a nice, consistent data template, it doesn't bother to re-render the UI objects. It just reuses the existing ones. Which, going back to that initial question, if you're worried about caching of UI objects, the first question should be, do you need to? And can you take care of it, or can you leverage this to make it work? Right? Because if you have a nice, easy, homogeneous style collection and you can make your tab control do something fancy like this, great, we're done. We don't need to think. The data, the tab control does its thing. It's only going to ever instantiate our views once. We're good. Like I said, if we had something where there was like a scroll viewer or similar, this could theoretically be problematic. Like, this behavior of the tab control has bitten many a person. This is not always a trivial thing to deal with. So let's look at something a little more interesting. So let's give ourselves, let's do this thing then a little bit differently. So let's make a second tab control. Second tab control. And we're gonna go grid row view here and tab item view model. Let's go with public partial class other tab view model. Boy, I cannot type. Model. Hang on. Mountain Dew. Okay, that should improve the typing. Okay, not the spelling, but the typing. So let's see. I'm getting very lazy. I will say, Copilot is, I think, reducing my typing skill. Because every time it guesses correctly, it's less I have to type, and therefore, it's like my typing skill just atrophies. It's both a blessing and a curse. Okay, so we'll do other tab view model. And let's go into our main window view model. And let's just do something like this. So if counter mod 2 equals 0. Alright, we'll just do, let's see, tab item view model, new tab, boom. Just gonna do this. Boom. And then do tab, we'll assign there. Get rid of all this garbage. Go away. Go away. And then we'll say new tab gets new other tab view model. We'll just do something like this. And then we'll go with new tab dot title gets, and then we'll just do all this jazz. Boom, boom. And then we'll just add it in the list. Okay, so every other tab is going to be a slightly different type. Visual Studio stop. Okay, one thing real quick, just because it made me happy. So you will note I am playing on Visual Studio 2022 preview release. Help about. So if you see things that look weird that are different from your Visual Studio, it's potentially because of the preview. So for those who care, 17.4.0 preview 2.1. But one of the cool things that they have is this new breakpoint UI. So before, you used to have all of this stuff to dive into it, and now you can just hover on the breakpoint, disable, which in my opinion is awesome to just have that kind of functionality right there. But then it's also quick to get into the settings. So I like that little pop-up menu. It's rather slick. So hopefully it sticks. I've learned to try to not get too attached to preview features because sometimes they don't make it. Sometimes they don't make it. Where was I going? Other tab item. All right, we're going to make another tab source. Okay, so this guy is also going to be bound here. Let's put in another row. Great. Okay, so rather than setting it up like this, because this is one way to set up the tab control. Let's do a little bit different. So rather than doing a content template here, we'll leave the stuff above. Trying to decide if it makes more sense to share this, whatever. I was contemplating pulling this template out and sharing it between the two. Whatever. Not gonna stress. Let's do something like this. So, well, first of all, if we launch this, let's just confirm we have tabs and 2 tab controls. Great. Are you off? All that showing of breakpoints and then it breaks on me. Great. So I can do this. It works. You'll note down here, I've got some that are other tab view model and some that are tab view model. Great. That makes sense. Okay, so if we come in here, let's do TabControl.resources. So one of the ways that people often hide, yes, that is what I want. Okay, hang on. Go. Come on, Copilot. I'm not even going to give you any typing. Just guess. Nothing? How about if I typed that? Can you figure it out from that? Sorry, now this is quickly becoming a game with Copilot. Oh. You were doing so good, Copilot. No, you're close, but that's not quite right. Fine. I'll finish typing it and then we'll go and discuss. Okay. So one of the ways people often deal with disparate collections is by setting up implicit data templates to go through and do it. So, for example, if we fire this guy up, I'm just calling out the differences in these tab controls. So you'll note in our first one, we very explicitly told the tab control, hey, your content for every tab is going to be this data template. We were very explicit about it. On the second tab control, we've given it no such hint at all. And content presenters have like, I don't know, 4, we'll go look in just a second. Some number of small built-in data templates that they know about. And the default one, if you don't give it anything, is it's going to go, yeah, toString sounds like a great way to render this object. And so that's all it does, is it gets a view model and it goes, I call toString on it. And that's what I output. And very consistently, the bug that shows up is people going, hey, why isn't my thing rendering properly? I just see the type name. Well, what you're getting is WPF saying, yeah, I got this object type thingy here, and I don't know how to render a tab item view model. Like, that's not a UI object. I don't know what UI goes with a tab item view model. So the simple solution is often to just put in some resources with some data templates. Because when the content presenter isn't explicitly told what its template is, it starts walking up the tree looking to say, hey, I don't know what it is. but maybe one of my parents does, and it'll walk all the way up, eventually getting to your app.xaml and all that jazz, which is great. And so you'll note this guy walked all the way up, and now when it got up to the tab control, it said, hey, do you know how to render a tab item view model? And it went, I got you. I know exactly what to do with that. And let's make these things pale green, just so we can have some differences between these two. Blue, sure. Okay, Alice Blue is not nearly visible enough on Azure. That is, I guess, mildly visible. Okay. Give me a better color. I gotta pick a better color. Hang on. Sorry. Color is pale turquoise. That'll be a little brighter. There we go. Okay, those are roughly on par. So you'll note though, as I'm toggling between these tabs, you'll note that instance count is going up, but it's only going up when it has to. So for example, the tab 2 is an other tab item view model, whereas tabs 1 and tab 3 are a tab item view model. So when I toggle between these two tabs, it once again accurately realizes and goes, hang on, I already got one of those data templates. I don't need more of them. I can go ahead and reuse them. So again, this works, but it's also likely the cause of the YouTube commenter's original question of, hang on, I started down your process of setting up the item template and doing these styles, and I've got data templates defined, but I keep seeing my user control constructor invoked. Well, what's likely occurring is the tab items going, well, all I have is a content presenter here. When you go through and switch, if I need a different UI, I'm not necessarily caching the UI per se. What I'm doing instead is reaching in and saying, well, let's go through and build it up if it's been different. Let's go and look real quick, because I know I teased that out a little bit on the content presenter. So the content presenter, if we go and look. So content presenter, if we look at its static constructor, so note this gets done once, it generates a bunch of default templates for strings when hosted in a content presenter with recognized access keys true. Great. Default template for strings. XML nodes. It has a default template for UI elements, which is effectively render the UI elements. And then the default template for everything else. Right? So when content is being rendered in WPF, nothing magical happens at all. There is no magic. It is all defined in these templates. So if something is going weird. Now, one thing while I was digging through all of this that I wanted to call out. So tab control derives itself, if we go all the way to the top. Tab control itself derives from selector, and maybe it's easier to show this in Visual Studio. We go F12 here, tab control derives from selector, which ultimately derives from items control. Items control, as I learned, is a very leaky abstraction. The number of things that reference tree view in here, the fact that items control has special case tree view in no fewer than 28 instances where I found the string tree view in here. Yeah. There's stuff like this that just made me go, yeah. Yeah, I don't doubt there was a use case that is needed for it. Now, it is worth noting, it seems like a very simple thing to solve, and it's worth calling out. Items control is a base class for a lot of very different types of controls. Tree views, list box, data grid, tab control. All of these are items controls, and I believe all of them are selectors as well. I believe so. So that the items control class itself has a lot of fairly complex code in there because it has to handle things like grouping. Like the grouping code in here adds a ton of complexity because we're looking at it from a very simplistic list of I've got 3 items. But imagine now a tree view that has like 100,000 items and there's grouping and hierarchy and nesting. It's like, oh, head spin, blow, right? Like that just, my brain starts to hurt, especially looking through some of these things. But I did find the items control bit and the leaky abstraction a little funny. Now, going all the way back to the other question about actually capturing the UI. Now, there are a couple ways to go about doing this, and I will share a few things that I found because I went hunting to see if anybody had actually run into something. Oh, that is an ugly looking URL. Let's turn that off. Small URL. Paste. There, better. So there is this code project one, and you can go through and read about all of the different approaches, and I really appreciate this author's actually calling out his design goals, looking at other prior art about what people can do. As far as I can tell, I believe he posted the same thing on his own blog there. It looked like the same one. And then there is also this Stack Overflow article with a few other solutions that people have come up with. Now, all of these solutions tend to revolve around the same principle. So in order to, and I think this one had this one had a fairly complex. So one, just looking at this flow chart, you can tell up front, caching the UI is already not trivial because it's a little difficult, especially if you're going to do data binding with MVVM and data templates on top of it. If you were to just go through and hard code, and actually let's demo that real quick. Let's demo that. If we were to go through and do so a non-data bound approach, right? So if we come up here, one more row. Let's make this a little bigger. Go 600. Okay, so if we do a tab control, let's see, grid row 3, and we go in here and we go tab item, header item 1, right? And inside of here, we're gonna do red, and we do item 2, and we do item 3. We're just gonna make these things have slightly different backgrounds of blue, violet, sure, and oh, I haven't used fuchsia yet. Fuchsia's ugly enough, we should use it. Okay, there we go. All various warm colors. So if we do this, okay. So one, you can see we don't get the second text box because that one had a binding with the assumption that it would have a tab item view model behind it, and it doesn't. So we are only going to get the instance count. And what we can see is one, because these things were later, they got instantiated first because this guy got 1, 2, 3. But as I toggle between these, once again, because the content is known and fixed, these things end up just existing. So if you are working with something like one of my initial examples where maybe you have a fixed set of tabs, like maybe a profile, address, phone number, like there's a set of things, I would propose setting up your tab control like this. Again, the guiding principle here would be, when possible, set it up such that the tab control is able to reuse the same templates. Because then you save on the needing to recreate the UI, and you end up getting some very nice performance out of it, which is wonderful. Okay, so back over to here. So how all of these ones end up working is it relies on keeping track of when the tabs change, grabbing the rendered content, and then attempting to cache it. Because normally the tab item's content could either be a UI thing that derives from dependency object, such as this bottom one, or the tab item's content could be a view model in the case of MVVM and data binding. So tab item.content is just an object, and it could be there's special cases for, are you a UI object or are you something else? And so in this case, the solution is to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to generate up this content manager, and what we're going to do is, in order to get the current item, we're going to leverage our cache, and when there's a cache miss, so cache content is null, what we are going to do is we're going to create a new content control, effectively adding a layer into that visual tree that previously wasn't there. We're going to attempt to extract the template and template selector, because in this guy's solution, you can't use the original properties because those are being repurposed to support this. And then we're going to go ahead and bind into there and then set the internal cache content. Effectively using this content control to be able to populate down here. So you can see on each of these tabs that they have, there's the tab item, and then the content for that tab item is coming from this cache, and it's being held on to. And I totally believe that this works. This is a lot of effort. And part of what makes this very, very challenging is there's not an easy way to inject into this. So what do I mean by that? Inside of here, we briefly looked at the get, what is it? Update. Okay. Wherever you got used. I already forgot the name of the method. Update selected content. This guy. Actually, you know what? Let's do a demonstration. There's probably an easier way to demonstrate this. So let's go in here and let's create up our stop debugging. Let's create up a custom caching tab control. Okay, and we'll just fix that, tab control, boom. System Windows controls, boom, tab control. There. Drive from the right thing, do all the right stuff. Great. Okay, so if we think, okay, let's get clever here, right? This case here is obviously the hardest one, so we're gonna switch this guy out to be a caching tab control. Oh, hush now. Fine, I'll compile the code. Be happy, designer. There. Okay, so we've got a caching tab control. We come in here, and let's look at some key methods. So container. So is item container override? Ride container. Prepare container for override. I remember all the ones that are important. There's like get container for item override. Yeah, these two here are the more interesting. These ones here. Okay, and then do that. So we are going to debug Wpf directly because I think this is something also worthwhile showing. So if you would like to debug Wpf, I will show you what to do. Tools, options, and then you go debugging and then general. As you can see, I've been in here before. Okay, the magical incantation is you need to enable .NET Framework source stepping. Now, when you check this box, at least on my preview version of Visual Studio, it automatically unchecks enable just my code. Now, if my memory is correct, that didn't always used to be the case. So if you are on an older version of Visual Studio, or if this is just a preview thing, you need to also make sure that enable just my code is turned off. Because when you have enable just my code checked, What that means is debugger only debug my code, which is useful most of the time. It makes the debugger go quicker. Everything's happier. The debugger doesn't have to think about a lot of assemblies. It just focuses on your stuff. Right. In our case, we very much want to go and muck with other things and step into other things. So we are going to turn this on. Okay. And we're going to set some breakpoints. Breakpoint, breakpoint, go. Okay. So first breakpoint hit. And recall that this is our middle tab control, the one where we had some implicit data templates targeting the other tab view model type and the regular tab view model. So if we come in here and we're going to go call stack. So one other thing to be aware of, where is the, am I blind or stupid? There's an external, there's a show external, and I don't recall where it is. Include calls, show external. Boy, I turned it on, and now I don't see the option to turn it back off. Typically, what you will likely see the first time you fire up is you will see your breakpoint here, and then you'll see a little square brace, and it'll say external code. If you right-click on that, you can say, trying to remember what the menu option is, something about show me all the stuff, not just the external code. But the important part here, we can step out and start poking around into the .NET framework source, because now we can debug that too. I realize even though it says .NET framework source debugging, framework in this case does not mean old school .NET framework. Think framework in the general sense. That F should probably be lowercase, in my opinion. Whatever. Okay, but you can see that we get into here of is item its own container override. And the item being passed in this case, is our tab item view model. And if we look up here, we can go, okay, so it's checking to see if it is its own container. Effectively saying, okay, this item that I got from my bound collection, because the items coming through here are the ones that were bound here. So in this case, our tabs collection. And so let's go back to where we were. We'll step into the base. We can see that when we step into tab control's definition of is it its own container is checking, is it a tab item? In our case, a view model is not a tab item. So we're going to return false. Great. Because we return false, it says get container for item override. And this is where it gets a little more interesting. Right? This is effectively saying, okay, given an item, please give me back the relevant container type for it. And you'll note here, once again, tab control has an overridden method for this where it returns a new tab item. Now, this will be different depending on which items control you are working with. So in a lot of cases, like a list box, you will get a list box item. Tab control, tab item. Data grid, don't remember. Data grid view row, I think. Regardless, each collection type is responsible for returning back its own object. But you'll note this object, when it calls get container for item override, this doesn't have the item pass through to it. Right? This is part of what makes this, oh, step out. I don't want to look at the base of that. This is part of what makes this really hard, is this item got passed in to know if it's its own container override, but doesn't get passed down to the get container. And I think that's intentional because of the idea of virtualization. Again, the idea of caching the tab items one in a small fixed set makes sense for a small fixed set. It does not scale well. That's the other thing I should point out. If you go to the effort of trying to cache the UI for your tabs, please put something in place to make sure that your list isn't huge. Because if you do that on like 100,000 tabs, oh dear heavens, you're probably throwing an out of memory exception. Probably. Like a lot of this stuff, a lot of these items controls in WPF are built to handle massive data sets. And it's good if we don't break that. Okay, So this guy goes through and gets the container. Great. It is a tab item. It goes through and says, okay, as a visual, great. Grabs the visual parent, mostly to check and say, okay, if I was given back, because this is a virtual method. So WPF can't make assumptions when it says, get me a container for an item. Something else could override that and just arbitrarily hand back cached items. Hypothetically, right? And if that's the case, it's going to go through the effort of saying, well, in the event that it may have already be attached to another control, we need to remove it because controls can only be at one point in the visual tree. We can't have two tab items both in the visual tree with different parents. Like that just doesn't compute, right? So it gets back the container, comes in here and goes link container to item. Let's jump into here. And so here we can see it is going through and it's saying, okay, container, clear the item for item container property. And this one here, I believe, is an internal member. Yeah, this is an internal one. We can't easily touch it. And then we come in here. This is where we're going to forward down the data context into that item. Because remember, the get container just returned new tab item. It set nothing up about it. So it goes, okay, let's go ahead and set the data context because that'll be important. And then here we come into this item container generator. This is the underlying property, and you can actually see it. We just do something like this dot item container generator. Like this property exists and is public on all items controls, and it's very handy. If you want to do the link going between a data bound item and its container, this is the guy that does that mapping. It's important to remember though that when you ask for a container for an item or a container from an index, null is a valid return, because you can imagine in the case of say a list box where it's been virtualized, it's only going to have containers for the visible number of items. So if you ask for something outside of that range, there's no container. It's not there. So worth knowing about that. So all of this complexity that's in here comes from a lot of this idea of needing to track containers, virtualization, this, that, and the other. Okay, set alternation index. Tab items, I don't think use this. This is oftentimes used in list boxes where you have like every other row set up. Great. Item index, generate direction, move forward. Again, you can see this is all around the virtualization of caching and reusing. And then generate next, stop at realize, new is realized, blah, blah, blah. And then it's going to lose the source somewhere along the way, and we're going to lose it. But eventually coming back and grabbing it at the next item. So I'm going to disable. Oh, I need to remember to... Boy, my muscle memory just always wants to clear the breakpoints, and I need to remember to stop doing that. But this is what ultimately ends up making doing the caching of this really, really difficult, is with the entire setup of how the item container generator is built, because it's designed to be able to reuse those UI elements. In order to go through and effectively cache those, you have to almost... I don't want to say cheat. You have to lie to the system and build that up and maintain all of it yourself, which is effectively, let's see here, which is effectively what this entire content manager is designed to do. Is it's designed to go through and maintain this entire cache of items simply so that it can come back and reassign those things back in. Like that's the entire point of this, which feels very heavy-handed to me. So again, guiding principles I would say is when possible, try to maintain a setup where the tab control knows its data template ahead of time. That's key, because then you end up getting that UI reuse, and you don't have to eat that cost every time. Trying to think if there was anything else I was going to say on tab controls. don't know if there is. So, one thing I will comment. So, Ray Carrot, if you are watching, hopefully that answers a lot of the questions. If you want to try to shoot me a link, feel free to reach out on Gitter or similar. I'm happy to take a look. I have a suspicion. So one, I'm going to apologize for my first answer. I do not think I understood the question very well when I wrote this. So I'll say that up front, is I don't think I fully understood the question. And I misunderstood a few things about how the tab control was working when I wrote it. So I suspect that is ultimately the cause of what you are bumping into here, is running into the problem of the item template, forcing it to recreate the UI for that content presenter. So, yeah. With that said, it would... I don't think I necessarily have time tonight, but I do suspect that it would be possible to build out a control and a control template that do effectively do the cache. I don't know if it's a good idea though, which is part of why I've hesitated doing it. I will say the two solutions presented here, the code project as well as the Stack Overflow article, both appear to work. I only kind of briefly gave them a cursory glance, but they both work on the same principle of grab the UI elements, hold on to them in their own collection, and then reassign them back in as necessary. I have no idea why that if condition is there. But again, I would be a little hesitant to do this in a lot of cases, simply because you end up eating some major costs that may not be there. Now, it could be, so I will say this, there's an app I've worked on where it was a tab layout as the root level window, and each of the content on each of the tabs were kind of heavy. They were fairly big, but in those cases, it was very much they were a fixed set of tabs. Now, I had initially messed it up in that what I had done initially is I had created a tab control. I don't think I want to leave this cache tab control in. I think I'm going to downgrade this back. I had initially set the app up like this, or very similar, where I effectively had a tab control, and I had done some data templates like this that forced it to recreate every time. If you have a fixed set of tabs, don't make the same mistake I did. If you have a fixed set of tabs, go with something like this. It's very appealing to think that you want to data drive it like this. It feels like a mistake to me. It feels very much like a mistake. And there are reasons where you might have a fixed set of maybe like only a dozen tabs, but based upon, well, maybe this user's an admin, so they get to see these 3 extra tabs or whatever, right? Like there could be rules like that where it's like, oh, okay, so we want to, maybe remove or show some additional tabs based upon some additional state. That's fine, but I still wouldn't go about it this way. I think I would still advocate for setting it up this way and then appropriately showing or hiding them as needed, right? So like one option, like that. Fire this guy up. Because that is legitimate things to want to do, right? Is I don't want to show all my tabs. So I might propose that if that's the case, well, don't necessarily do it as a collection, right? The point of the view model is to support the view. Like that is the purpose of the view model. Like they work together. They're interconnected because the view has bindings. The view model should expose data in a reasonable way as to support the view. And I would posit that this way is not the best way to approach it. That it would be better to do something more like this, where if you know that your set of tabs is limited, lock it in here. And this might even be a reasonable use case to say, hey, maybe rather than doing this kind of wacky data binding, we set something up. So one other thing that might be worth exploring real quick. Just trying to think of how this plays out. Okay, so couple ways. If I was trying to implement this, how we could go about doing it. So one, this setup here translates very nicely into this same setup here, right? So if all of your data templates could be converted down into a single template and then have appropriate things toggled based upon the view model, that's a very easy switch. And you gain a bunch by doing so. So if you could condense the data templates, that would be one option. Adding tab items directly is another, in my mind, very reasonable option. Because you'll note in these cases down here, the subtle change that has happened is the content property is now set on these tab items. Right? So this is not the same as these two up here, where these ones are both using data templates. So functionally, from the tab controls perspective, when we come into here, I'm going to link this section because I keep coming back to it. Our top two tab controls are falling into the else case. The third one where we've directly set our content, I guess in both of these cases, they're coming in and they're setting the content template. Wrong section. This is going to be down in the items control, the one that we debugged into. I'm an idiot. Is item its own container override? That method. Boom. Take me there. This method here. So this is more accurately. This is the subtle change that's happening in that third one. Is the item itself is no longer the view model. The item itself is a UI object. So we're going to end up falling into a very different situation. Now, these ones here can still be data bound, right? There's nothing stopping me from saying, okay, tab item, data context, binding, right? And then exposing properties for each of my view models. That's totally a thing I can do. And it would not be a horrible thing to say, okay, view model 1. And then quite often what I would end up doing is saying, okay, if I want to data drive this, right? Binding relative source Okay, why am I getting no help? Why are you giving me, did I typo something? Property was not, see that of course I'm getting nothing when you can't spell relative source. Thank you. Relative source. Thank you. Mode. Self. Not this. Self. Like I would be very, and even this relative source, this is just very explicit. Technically, you could get this whole thing down to just being, that. But a visibility binding with a value converter on it that says, hey, if this thing's null, set the visibility to collapsed. I would tend to approach things this way rather than the collection approach. So, and if that's, people struggle with that, let me know, and I can happily slap that example in. I think I'm going to leave this thing visible for now. I don't know if there's a lot of gain in that. Let me get rid of this control, and I do want to push this change out, though, before I get too carried away. So, you can see I had a branch that I was powwowing on to test a lot of this stuff. So, there, yeah. Tab control samples. Stage, commit, and we're gonna push straight to master because I can. View origin on GitHub. I will call out too, if people are interested in doing some Hacktoberfest contributions, this repo here has a lot of opportunities. So specifically, a lot of these demo apps that I build, in an ideal situation, what happens is when you dive in on it. Hey, Maverick, welcome back. Oh, and I picked on one that didn't have it. Yeah. So ideally, when you dive in on one of these projects, it's nice to have a README that kind of shows you what the project is to give you a visual way of doing it. So if anybody is interested, I wrote a script at one point that generated issues for all projects without a README. But if people are interested in a quick and dirty way to get your Hacktoberfest PRs, just saying, this repo. There's a lot in here, and all of these issues. If you want to see a sample of what one of these could look like, this is a fairly straightforward template. Michael is one of the additional maintainers on the material design project, and so he started this process of going through and doing it. So I have just a very basic thing of a sample, and then if you want to capture those pretty little animations, screen to GIF. Also, plug this tool real quick. This is an awesome WPF app to begin with. So this is and it's also one that I enjoy using for screenshots, motion GIFs. It just works. It's awesome. It's beautiful. So for what it's worth, screen to GIF, another wonderful tool. The developer for this is also fairly active on Twitter too, and anytime people run into problems. Occasionally I have seen people report issues with the quality of the GIF, and oftentimes it comes down to like their FFmpeg installation, because that behind the scenes, depending on your encoder settings, it'll often fall into FFmpeg to do it. So if you do have FFmpeg installed directly, you might check what version you're on. Later is better. Okay. Tab items, content controls, and breathe, and breathe, and breathe. Okay, just checking, making sure I hit all my tabs, making sure I covered everything. I think I covered everything I was going to talk about. I don't remember why I had tab item open. I don't remember. Okay, I think with that, I have had like 3 or 4 late evenings all in a row, so I am probably going to call it a little bit early tonight. Thank you everyone for coming and hanging out. Also, Ray Carrot, I appreciate the question on the tab controls. I really do enjoy when I know there's at least one person for whom this content will be useful. Hopefully other people found it useful as well, especially for diving in deep. Like I said, the tab control, because it is just an items control and a selector, like so many other WPF controls, a lot of the stuff here applies to all of those controls as well. So if you are struggling with your items controls or trying to figure out the best way to go through and implement stuff, hopefully this is somewhat instructive, at least in debugging, finding solutions, and working your way through it. So no problem, Maverick. I realize my streaming hours are bad for most of the world. I tend to stream when the vast majority of the population on the globe is asleep, which is unfortunate for the live viewing numbers, but at least the YouTube recordings pick them up as well. So with that, I will tell everybody happy coding. See everyone next time.